Hello everyone, this is Mr. Yeps. Welcome to today's lesson. Today we'll be looking at Supreme Military Council 2, which ruled Ghana from July 1978 to June 1979. Now let's begin today's lesson. On 5th July 1978, it was announced on radio Ghana that General Ignatius Kutu Echampon had resigned as the chairman of the council and had voluntarily retired from the army. Now, many people disagree on this matter as to whether Echampon resigned voluntarily or there was a coup. So let's go through that situation a bit before we continue the lesson. So the events surrounding Echampon's resignation have been described as a palace coup rather than a voluntary resignation. So as I pointed out earlier on 5th July 1978, the colleagues of Echampon besieged his office. They went to his office, and these soldiers were General Akuffo, Major General R.E.A. Kote, who was an army commander, and Air Vice Marshal Yabuachi, who was Air Force commander, and Major General Osei Boateng, who was a guard, then a border guard, then Mr. Ernest Akon, who was Inspector General of Police, Brigadier General Date Wellington, who many describe as the linchpin of the palace coup, who later became army commander, and a number of other officers of the Military Advisory Council. Now, before they entered Echampon's office, they had to overcome Echampon's guards. That is, they succeeded disarming Echampon's bodyguards. Now, practically at gunpoint, Echampon was prevailed upon to sign a letter of resignation. They gave him a letter of resignation to sign as the head of state. At first, Echampon didn't want to sign the resignation letter or to accept the request that was made by these colleagues. But he finally gave in when it dawned on him that it was practically impossible to resist armed colleagues, and I emphasize armed colleagues. After signing the letter of resignation, Echampon was hurriedly bundled up and moved to presidential retreat at Akosombo in a heavily armed convoy. Indeed, Echampon lived in splendor in Akosombo before he was moved to his hometown, that is Trabuom Shidiem, a village near Kumasi in the Ashanti region. So these were the circumstances within which Echampon's resignation came to being, or the circumstances within which he resigned. So I leave you to judge whether there was a coup or there was a resignation. I'll be looking forward to your perspectives on this matter in our subsequent discussions. Now let's move forward. So, in Akuffo's maiden speech to the public, to Ghanaians, he explained, or he put forward, 3 reasons why Echampon resigned. And these were the reasons. Number 1, Akuffo said that Echampon had surrounded himself to the exclusion of his colleagues. And again, most of the advisors around Echampon were of doubtful ability and intentions. Now, the second reason that he put forward was that Echampon either unilaterally varied or changed decisions that were taken collectively, or sometimes he unilaterally took decisions, important decisions, without consulting members of the SMC1 members. Then the last reason he gave was that the channel of communication between Echampon and his colleagues had virtually broken down. So these were the reasons that Akuffo gave concerning a champion's resignation. Now let's move forward to the type of government that Akuffo formed. Let's look at his approach. Now he ensured that the people who formed his government, or the people who were part of his government, were not individuals who had served under the previous government led by a champion. So he basically removed all those officers who had worked under a champion from his government. Again, he also removed from office many of the police and military officers who had served in the champion's government as commissioners in ministries and so on and so forth. Now, having said that, let's move on to the economic policies of Akuffo. Now, Akuffo came to power at a time that inflation was very high, so he decided to fight inflation and to also increase the productivity in the country. To be specific, to avoid a situation whereby there will be continuous shortage of goods. So he worked on increasing productivity in the manufacturing and then the agri sector. Now, secondly, he also embarked on improvement in tax collection. That is, he tried as much as possible to ensure that people who were escaping through the holes in the tax net, they were brought to book. So companies that were under declaring their assets were reassessed and the writing was done. Again, tax concessions on locally manufactured goods were cancelled. Now, the next economic policy was that he also tried to correct the imbalances in the budget. So his government tried to encourage savings. So government expenditure was looked closely. In other words, he tried to cut down government expenditure and priorities were set so that there wouldn't be any wastage in the way that government spends money. In some cases, too, contracts that were given under the previous government were reassessed. Sometimes they were cancelled, other times they were put on hold. These were some of the measures that were put in place by the Akuffo government to ensure that there was sanity in the economy. The next economic policy was his fight against economic fraud and malpractices. So under this point, individuals, foreigners, citizens, anyone who was known to have, let's say, evaded taxes, they were tracked, and sometimes assets of people like that were frozen, and then also citizenship of some individuals, of some Lebanese businessmen were also revoked because of their fraudulent business activities. And in some cases, these business people or these individuals were deported to their countries. The next policy was the devaluation of the cedi by 58%. You know, devaluation has been a key theme in Ghana's history, right from the period that Nkrumah was ousted from power. Successive governments tried to devalue the cedi over a long period of time. So again, devaluation was also done by Akuffo's government. So 2.7 Ghana cedis was to $1. That was the exchange rate. So if you had $1, you could buy goods that is worth 2.75 Ghana cedis, which meant that the value of the cedi had depreciated, and in other words, the cedi had become cheaper. All right. So the next point is strikes and government reaction. So Akuffo's government also saw an increasing rate of strikes and protests across the country, and key of those strikes came from the Ghana Oil Refinery, the Electricity Corporation, the Ghana Water and Sewage Corporation. These were the key strikes that came up under his regime. Now, an interesting aspect is to look at how Akuffo's government reacted to these strikes that were happening. The SMC government passed, unfortunately, I should say, passed the Emergency Decree Act on 7 November 1978, which outlawed strikes and other forms of protest. So, in this case, Ghanaians were not allowed to embark on strikes and other forms of protest. So, a key aspect of our democratic practice around this time, let's say, democracy at this point in time wasn't practiced to a large extent, since people didn't have the opportunity to register their discontent or their displeasure on the things that the government was doing. And the last economic policy that was embarked on by the Akuffo government was the demonetization of the cedi, which was basically an attempt to remove counterfeit currencies in circulation. So this brings us to the end of today's class, and the question that I have for you is, how effective were the economic policies of Akuffo in dealing with the economic problems of Ghana? So thank you for staying with me through this lesson. See you next time.